All right, now that we've talked about cosine similarity, let's move on to a more modern ranking algorithm, BM25. BM25 is sort of the standard for a TF-IDF style model. It has very strong performance. It's now become the standard ranking algorithm in the Lucene open source product. Finally, they finally adopted it years after they should have adopted it. It's a wonderful ranking methodology. Stands for best match 25. They worked through all sorts of different variations of it. If you look in the textbook, you can see a derivation that explains the idea and how they come up with it, but at its core, it's a TF-IDF weighting scheme, again, utilizing this notion of dot product with features, where the features are the words. Okay, so let's take a look at it. I'm going to make a note also that, so on page 250 of the book, it's a more complex version of the formula. You do not need this more complex version. The more complex one is the complete BM25, and it's relevant when you have a notion of, oh, I know something about, and I know some relevant documents. What we are doing, and what you are doing on the homework, in particular, homework 4, you know that there are relevant documents in the QRELs, but remember, those are the answers. To use them would be to cheat. When you actually run your algorithm, you put in the query, and you rank documents, and you know nothing at all about the actual relevant documents. Okay? Don't get confused. You're going to want to use this formula. If you try to use the one in the textbook, you'll be like, I'm supposed to have relevant documents, and you will go down a path to messing yourself up. Let's look at a simpler version of this formula. All right, so it's set up BM25. We're going to have a document and a query. So again, we're going to compute a score for a document given a query, and when we, of course, score a collection, we score all the documents. Now, as mentioned before with cosine similarity, again, if a document is lacking, has none of the words in a query, it's going to end up with a score of 0. Okay, it's going to end up not in our ranking. So let me be careful, because 0 might be a really good score if we're scoring things with negative numbers. All right, so we're going to end up with it. We're never going to put it in our rank list if it doesn't have any of the words in the query. So we don't actually ever compute it overall documents. That would be really time consuming. So these are designed to work with our inverted index, and so that we only have to pull out the posting lists for the words in the query to do the computation. If a document isn't found in those postings lists, it never ends up in the ranking. All right, so let's go. We're going to have a good old summation, and this is actually long, so to give myself, I'll be careful. No, I think I can fit it in. I'll try not to be too wieldy with my notation. So we're going to have a summation, and we're going to go over the words in the query. And this is a element of notation. And so this is effectively meaning we are going over the unique words in the query. All right. So a word may appear multiple times, but we only sum once for that word. All right. So how does this work? As follows. We're going to have some constants, K1, plus 1 multiplied by f sub I. F sub I is the frequency. So this is the number of times of I in the document, D. All right, so this is our notion of term frequency. Okay, so this is the frequency of the word I in the document. I'll come back to about what these constants are. Then we have a big K. It's going to turn out that this big K is actually a function, not a constant, plus f sub I. All right, now we're going to multiply this. We've got K sub 2 plus 1, all by QF sub I. All right, so this is our frequency of I in the query. So as I said, these are the unique word occurrences in the query. And so if it occurred twice in the query, this would be 2. Okay, and now we're going to divide this one by K2 plus QF sub I. All right, now we're going to take the log of this at the end, which is n minus n sub I plus 0.5 all over n sub I plus 0.5. And n sub I is the number of documents with I in them. So that's our document frequency. So how many documents do we find that contain term I? Is n sub I, and the capital N is the number of documents in our collection. Okay, so let's break down what the parts of, and by the way, you gotta look at this and you gotta go, this thing is our ranking algorithm. It's fairly simple. And I think it's always important to remember is that simplicity takes a lot of work. All right. So to be able to have something that looks so simple and have it work so well is a great scientific achievement, truly. Okay. But we're not finished because I told you that K is a function. So K is equal to K sub 1 multiplied by 1 minus B plus B times dl divided by a v dl. All right, what are these? This is the document length, and it's the document length of document D. So again, what's document length? Document length is the number of words in the document. How do we know the number of words? Well, we tokenized that document and we found the number of tokens, the number of words in that document. What's the average document length? So, that's what this is. This is average document length. This is average document length in the collection. So take the document, all the document lengths in the collection, sum them up and divide by the number of documents in the collection. So this is what that K is that goes in there. And so we have these parameters, K sub 1, K sub 2, and B. So we have 3 parameters for this ranking algorithm that we can change and modify to optimize performance based upon differences in the collection and queries and things like that. But let's break down what we see in this formulation here. I said this was TF-IDF. So this first part of this is the TF in the document. Okay, so this is basically our weight that we give to that term in that document. Okay, this then pretty clearly would be the TF in the query. So how much weight do we give this word, or basically how many times it appears in the query? Same thing goes, this is how much weight we give for it appearing in a document. So this is our, tell me, how much is this document about this word? How much is this query about this word? Well, so the last thing then is this guy down here. This is our IDF. So this is, how important is this word? Do we know based upon the way that it is used in the collection? Basically, how many documents is it in the collection? And we're going to be doing this inverse document frequency of it, utilizing, again, the really nifty log so that we end up with a, so that it behaves in a much better fashion. This is very similar to the weighting that you saw previously. Some students in the past have asked where these 0.5s come from. The 0.5s come from the derivation. So you're going to go back to the derivation to look at them and see why they're there. All right, now let's talk about these parameters and what they are. If I had a beautiful second whiteboard, I would walk over to the other whiteboard and I would then write out what the parameters are. I don't, so I'm going to have to erase this. It's kind of a shame. It's so pretty, but we have to say goodbye to it. All right, so now what are those parameters that we can modify? So we'll call them tuning parameters. All right, B ranges from 0 to 1, and its purpose is it controls the amount of length normalization. Again, we noticed that document length divided by the average document length. So we're controlling how much do we want to try to make all documents be fair. Because again, longer documents have a bigger chance at having the word appear more times, whereas a shorter document can't. It's just limited. It can't possibly have the word appear as often. So how do we want to control for that? As well as to what extent do we want to favor long documents versus short documents and things like that? That comes about with this notion of the length normalization. The textbook reports that 0.75 works well in a lot of cases, especially for these sort of collections that you're working with. All right. What's case of 1? So this is the saturation control for the term frequency in the document. 1.2 is known to work well. Again, this is based on the textbook. I'm going to say right now that what this is all about is it's similar to the use of log of the term frequency that we've seen previously. It's not the same thing, but it's similar. And the net effect is that after 3 or 4 mentions of a term in a document, there's little change in this value. Little change to the notion of the value of having a word occur more frequently. Now K2, it's the saturation control for the query. The book reports that values of 0 to 1,000 work well. So apparently there's a big range. And again, it's probably because we don't have usually lots of words in our queries. Most of our words are only mentioned once in a query. It probably, probably doesn't matter that much. So let's take a look at some of our notion with regard to this saturation business. It's one of the more interesting aspects of the BM25, and was certainly a key part of its discovery was figuring this out, as well as incorporating the document normalization, which is a very important thing. So there's some real, we see some people will talk about the axioms or the axiomatic notions of retrieval. How are we going to represent term frequency? How are we going to represent the importance of a word for discrimination, this IDF component? How are we going to manage preferences for different document lengths, or how do we fairly compare short and long documents? So this length normalization aspect to it. So these are some sort of key things that when we devise ranking algorithms that need to be addressed and dealt with. So let's look at with some common settings. So if we set B to be 0.75, let's go ahead and set the average document length to be 500, and let's set K1 equal to 1.2. If we do that, let's then take F sub I and see what's going on with these documents, the document frequency. So this is F sub I. So F sub I, this is the number of times it appears in a document. And this is going to be, this is the, the TF weight, so to speak, that we produce this first part of the component of the BM25. And so let's go ahead and this is where I wish this was better to draw it elsewhere, but there we go. All right, so we'll go along here. If we're at 0, it's 0. Word doesn't appear, it gets 0 weight. By the way, if it gets 0 weight in the document, that's summation. So a word that doesn't appear in a document, we have no value to it at all. Oh, that works out really well with our inverted indexes, doesn't it? We know that if a document doesn't appear in that postings list for that word, its score for that word is 0. Convenient. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or so on. 8, 9, 10. All right. So now let's look at 3 different document lengths. So let's say we have doc A, and it has 250 as its document length. We'll do document B. It is an average document. It's got 500 words, and a document C, which happens to have, we'll set it at 1,000 words long. So we go from sort of document half the average length to the average length to something twice the average length. All right. So, and this is how many times we find a word in the document. What happens as we plot this basic function? Again, this function that we're talking about, I should just put it here so that you know. Again, we're looking at the K1 plus 1 times F sub I all over K plus F sub I. And again, K is this function actually that's got the document length and stuff in it. Okay, so that's what this is what we're looking at here. Then, so to get this right, do find that amazing. Makes me wonder if I drew it correctly. I can only believe myself here. I'll just trust myself. So 1 to 1. So this and then about here. And this is doc B. Okay, so this is a document that's average length. Then actually the shorter document gets more credit for the same number of term occurrences. So this is an interesting thing. So when I have a document that's shorter and the word appears once, it gets more weight for that word because that word actually takes up more of that document, more of the total number of occurrences in that document. That makes sense, actually, to a certain extent, because, you know, if we only had a 10-word document and a word appears once, well, that's 10% of that document. If we have a 100-word document and the word appears once, it's only 1% of that document. So we know something's really about this term if it takes up more of the fraction of words in that document. And so this does make sense. And then this is our, we'll say our 1,000-word document is down here. All right, doc C. And so the big thing to note, again, is the way this function is designed is to capture this thing that we know about documents, which is, yeah, if it doesn't appear, that document's, quote, not about it. One word, ooh, that's our value. If we're an average document, we've got basically a length, we got a value of 1. Shorter one, we got a little bit more, longer document, a little bit less. As we add them up, it quickly goes over. It's still always increasing, but it increases at a low rate. So that, again, as I noted in the notes, by the time you reach 3 or 4 in here, it's basically kneed over and is slowly rising then as we get more occurrences. So this is an empirical finding for the English language and for documents. Oh yeah, about this point, that's all we really need to know, that the document is about that word. But yeah, if you're there 4 times, absolutely, you're a lot better than if you're there once. You know, but you're not necessarily twice as good, even though you have 3 extra occurrences. It takes a lot more occurrences to be twice as good as only having the word once. But you are worth more, okay? So again, it's an overall ranking algorithm. We're going to take all the words into the query into consideration and so forth and so on. So that's the TF weighting thing. It's similar to us applying the log, but again, it's got in it this document normalization built in, considering, oh, how many times does the word appear relative to the document length? So there's some really neat ideas, and they've all been captured here in what is a very simple formulation. So yes, in the homework 4, you will implement BM25. All right, that's all I have to say about it. About these 2D parameters. Again, the idea would be that, let's say you were working in an industrial setting or so forth. Again, you would build your own test collection, and you could actually tune the parameters on a subset of that test collection. So let's say you had 50 topics. You could train them on 30 of the topics and then measure their performance of the parameters on the other 20. And you could do this and you could have a good sense of, oh yeah, is there a way to know what the right setting of these parameters are? You actually wouldn't need, if you're just trying to find the optimal parameter settings, you wouldn't even do a test and train split. You would actually just do all the queries you had in your collection, trying to maximize what you believe would be the performance for your system. How are you measuring performance for the system? With whatever the appropriate evaluation measure is. And so again, you would change the parameter values, you would run the queries, you would get the results, you would measure the effectiveness, and you would be changing these parameter values until you could optimize performance on the evaluation measure or the set of evaluation measures if you have multiple measures. All right, so, and you might be wondering, how do we do those optimizations? Usually, because the number of parameters is not that many, you just do parameter sweeps. And so we consider a range of values for each of them, and we try out all combinations of parameter values until we find the optimal setting. So you might very well, try out 1,000, 10,000 or so different parameter settings and settle on one that is the best. Okay,